Welcome to part 2 of our series on Danny Faulkner's book, Falling Flat. And we're going to pick up on the notes I have starting on my electronic version's page 17 at the end of it, where it says, despite flat earthers' claims to the contrary, almost no one in the West, of course later including the church, believed that there was a dome over the earth. And let me show my notes here that I should have been showing. And you can see that my reaction is, first of all, this is another unsupported claim. What flat earthers? Where? Is there a list? Even so, the belief in celestial spheres that he's been talking about is not mutually exclusive with it anyway. So I'm not sure what point is being made here. All of this, as I've said, reference to who thought of something first, where they thought of it, whether the church fathers, so-called, thought of it. This is all beside the point. None of it proves the point being claimed in the book of destroying flat earth theory. This is mostly an appeal to consensus or popularity, which is not a supporting argument or a polemic against anything. And then he later says that Pythagoras thought that the earth, moon, and sun were spheres. I don't care. So what? I mean, again, everything in the sky can be spherical, but it doesn't make the earth a sphere, as earth is not a planet. So when somebody says the other planets, why do you think earth is flat even though other planets are round? They're assuming that earth is a planet, such that there are others like it. There's nothing in the Bible or in science that proves earth is a planet. Planet is from a Greek word meaning to wander. It's the root word of one of the many Greek words for sin in the New Testament, and it's wandering. So does the earth wander? Does it move? That's the point of debate, and so you can't just claim it is a planet, because then you're begging the question. So again, who cares what Pythagoras thought about it? What does it prove? Are we supposed to defer to our betters, as he told us not to do, not to just listen to what other people tell us? But he goes on to say that this is indeed what is expected as one passes south of the tropics if the earth is spherical. That is to say that where the sun was in relation to them. And so it's just so stories. And so what they would expect to see is irrelevant unless they're trying to predict something, which you can do without knowing the shape of the earth at all. All you have to do is watch things go overhead and make note of how often that happens and where it is in the sky when it happens, and keep meticulous records over a long period of time. That's all you need to do to predict things in the sky. So predictive power, again, doesn't prove any point on any side of this debate. But he says this is not expected in flat earth cosmology. Why not? Who says? Why wouldn't it be? He doesn't really explain that. He makes suggestions that because maybe the ancient Phoenicians knew of the spherical shape, but we don't know because we don't have any record. But he's putting that idea in your head anyway because of how detailed their predictions were. But again, all you have to do is pay attention. Okay, so then he says on the same page, or I'm on page 19, lunar phases make sense only if the moon is a sphere. The moon's alleged shape has nothing to do with the earth. And who cares, again, whether the moon is a sphere? I don't care what the shape is of things in the sky. It won't tell you what shape the earth is. Now you can assume, as he later will, or often in the book, that eclipses of the moon are Earth's shadow. Then he may make certain claims based upon that, but who says it's Earth's shadow? Have you ever seen a red shadow? Shadows typically don't have color in them, and unless there's some bleed over, but the center of the shadow, the umbra, is typically not picking up any color from anywhere. But when the moon is fully eclipsed, it's generally red. And they say that's a gazillion Earth sunsets. Well, that's a just so story. Anyway, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. It isn't true, it doesn't follow that lunar phases make sense only if the moon is a sphere. Again, having no bearing on the shape of the Earth. And then on page 20, he says that modern flat earthers generally deny that the moon is a sphere, insisting that it's a disk. Again, an unsupported claim. Who says that? What are their names? Are we saying that everything must be flat because Earth is a flat? That's no better of an argument than the Earth must be a ball because everything in the sky is a ball. Does not matter. And again, he doesn't list his sources for these claims. But he says modern flat earthers. It doesn't matter. I don't care who claimed it, if anyone claimed it. It just is irrelevant. And he says it's unclear why they think this. Well, that's a straw man, isn't it? Who thinks it? Let alone why. And if it's unclear and you've spent many years in flat earth community, why haven't you asked anyone why they think this? Is it possibly, if I'm going to guess like he does, possibly because no one said it? Is that why he hasn't asked anyone? I don't know. I'm not going to make a claim about that. So that's why I said it's not clear why Faulkner thinks this. I could ask him, but I don't care. And then he says, do flat earthers think that God is so malicious as to make the world in such a way that we could be so easily led astray on this? And my note is that evolutionists have long asked young earth creationists the same question regarding the fossil record. Why did God make the world appear flat then? Why did God make the world appear old? That's what they will say. Why is God deceiving you by putting things in the fossil record? And yet you would turn around, you have your rebuttals to that as the young earth creationist, which I wholeheartedly agree with. But to turn around then and say to flat earthers, why is God deceiving us to make it only look flat? Again, it's this double standard and not seeing how you're using the same logic that you have defended against. And then he says, apparently flat earthers think so. Again, it's a non sequitur, it's unsupported claim. And I don't know why he keeps doing this as a PhD, but it seems to be a theme in the book. So they say, and this question that he's answering is, what if the moon is spherical? Does that automatically mean that the Earth is spherical too? Apparently, flat earthers think so. Again, no, this is not true. Flat earthers don't think so. He hasn't named any. He hasn't proved that they think so. So then he goes on the basis of that straw man to say that brings us to one of Aristotle's arguments for spherical Earth. Once he realized that the moon was spherical, he surmised the Earth must be too. This is an argument by analogy, so it's hardly a rigorous argument, but Faulkner just used it a little bit ago. So does he realize that he just destroyed the everything else in the sky is a sphere, so Earth must be too argument? I don't know if he realizes that or not. I don't care to ask him, but I'm not going to write a book and make a claim that he said such a thing or that he assumed such a thing. And then he says on page 21, or sorry, I think I've gotten, no, I am right. Sorry about that. Page 21, either way, this argument by analogy isn't anything more than a confirmation of what one already believes. So we'll remember this when we see the everything in the sky is a sphere, so the Earth must be too. Because I think pretty sure we see it again, but he's just destroyed that argument on his own after using it. So confirm what you will on that. And then he says, he noted that, he's talking about Aristotle, noted that as the ship departs, it progressively disappears hull first. If the Earth were flat, the ship would appear progressively smaller as it moves away. Well, it does that, ultimately reaching the vanishing point, but here's the sticker, no part of the ship would disappear first. Again, we'll remember this when he talks about optics and refraction. Yes, it is quite possible for the bottom of a ship or anything else, even something on land, to disappear bottom first, any object, because of your angle of view, and that's what it depends on. If you're at a low angle of view, you're not very high off the ground, and you're looking at something miles away, you won't see the bottom of it. That's because of the limits of optics and your angle of view, and that your eye is going to try to resolve things at equal distances all around. And so if you're standing closer to one obstruction, the ground, than you are to the sky above you, which is very much higher in terms of any kind of limit, you're going to see the bottoms of things disappear first. That's just how optics works. So we need to keep this in mind in later chapters about how optics works. Anyway, and he says this is not possible on a flat Earth. Why not? He says just before that, from a beach, an island some distance offshore may not be visible, but would become visible as one ascends a bluff by the shore. Why wouldn't it be possible? Of course, everyone knows if you climb a ladder, you can see farther, or if you see the sunset in a valley and you climb up to the top of the hill, you'll see the sunset again. Nobody disputes that. But he says it's not possible on flat Earth. Is he saying on flat Earth there's no topography? I wouldn't make that argument. But anyway, it's quite possible on a flat Earth. He doesn't explain why it would be impossible. So it's a false claim, and he ignores conditions such as topography or lensing effects that the air can have, and obstructions that I've mentioned before, that no matter how big of a telescope you have, you're going to run into a limit where there's so many things, so much air between you and the object that you're just not going to see it. So yes, it can happen on a flat Earth. And then also on then to page 22, he says, however, the best argument for the Earth's sphericity from the ancient Greeks is the shape of Earth's shadow during an eclipse. And this is what I just mentioned a little bit ago. The notes are some kinds a little off and broken up because of just the way notes are made in electronically. But anyway, he's presuming that it's Earth's shadow, which begs the question, and it doesn't curve the right way for a shadow on a sphere. If you do this demonstration yourself, I can't call it an experiment, do that yourself, and I've done that in a video on my channel where I look at the various circular or disc shape or spherical objects and shine lights on them. And if you can move a light over a sphere in a darkened room and see which way the terminator line bends, it doesn't seem to work out right if you're looking at a sphere and putting a shadow on it and moving it across. It's not the same as what you see in a lunar eclipse. And that's all I'm claiming. That's all any flat earthers are claiming. Nobody's saying we know absolutely what the moon is or the sun is or what shapes they are. Now, I've looked at both of them through telescopes and telephoto lenses, and as far as I can tell, they do look spherical, but so what? I mean, you can look at sunspots going around the limb, the edge, and they appear, if you watch them over time, they appear to elongate towards the edges, which is what you would see if you got a magic marker, or they call them now Sharpies, and put that on a rubber ball and then turn the ball away from you. That circular dot will tend to look a little elliptical. And that's what I see with sunspots. It's harder to say on the moon because the moon doesn't turn from our perspective, and there's no guarantee, no proof that it turns at all. It does seem to roll across the skies as the sun does. I've done videos on both and made my own observations and took timestamps and everything. They tend to both roll, like you're rolling a ball across your field of view, not away from you or turning away from you, spinning away from you, but just rolling. And as far as getting a difference of focus, if you were to look at the center of a ball from a long distance and focus on the center, then focus on the edge, they might be slightly different, but it's difficult to tell with anything you're looking at that's you're looking through all of our air layers to see. I wouldn't draw any conclusions from that. Now, it can appear maybe that it's a ball. I don't know. And I do know that when you see shadows on the moon, surface shadows, when the moon is not full, there must be some kind of external light to make those shadows. if you shine a light from within a ball with topography on it, and I've tried this, you won't get surface shadows. And yet, when the moon is full, there are no surface shadows, and it doesn't behave like it's being lit externally. It behaves as though it has its own light. And so I would conclude, the best I can from observations, that the moon is translucent, that it does get some external light. I'm not saying from where, but it's just like an experiment, or not an experiment, an observation I did with a translucent trackball from a computer, and shined a very bright light right on its surface. It glowed evenly from within with its own color, even though the flashlight was just white light. So translucent things with their own properties can emit their own light evenly, but that light they're emitting must come from within. You tell me what that means. The moon has properties of both being externally and internally lit. I don't know what that means. Nobody does. But it doesn't prove anything about the shape of the Earth. But when you assume that what you're seeing in a lunar eclipse is a shadow, first of all, you're assuming it's a shadow, and second of all, you're not paying attention to which way the curve behaves or changes as it moves across the surface of any sphere. So this doesn't prove anything either. And then on page 23, he says, from this information, they could anticipate when a lunar eclipse was possible. All you need is careful record keeping. As I've said before, you can predict just about anything if you keep track of patterns and take a lot of data points. That's all you need to do. So far in this book, we've seen no proof or disproof of anything. And then he says, if the Earth were round and flat, I don't know who says that, straw man, such as a disk, could it cast a circular shadow on the moon? Again, I ask, who is making this claim? And yes, it can, but it's only if you think it's a disk do you have problems from other angles other than flat on making a circular shadow. We don't make this claim. The Bible doesn't make that claim. Nobody says the Earth is a flat disk. The Bible says the surface we live on is flat, and that the Earth itself, whatever you want to include in that term, is fixed and unmovable. And there are waters above and water below. And in 2 Peter, it says the world was made out of water and by water. And this was alluded to in some degree by Russell Humphreys in his book Starlight in Time. But given that, I don't know why anyone would have a problem with the biblical view or any other ancient view of the Earth as something like some cultures have called it, like a clamshell, where we live in the center of the clam, and the shell is the upper shell is the firmament, and below our feet, the lower half of the shell is filled with dirt. And of course, there are places where the oceans are, and beneath that is the realm of the dead. That's what the Bible depicts. That's what many ancient cultures depict. So who believes in this disk? Nobody I know. Why is Faulkner arguing against it? It's a straw man. This is a classic burning a straw man fallacy. And then he says on page 24 that this shows the Earth is curved in an east-west direction. What's this? Well, he said just before that, he talks about communication. He says that the lunar eclipse began before sunset or moonrise in Spain, but after sunset, moonrise in Greece, while communication was much slower, significantly so, in ancient world than it is today. People did record and share their observations, so people in the ancient world were aware of this effect. This shows that the Earth is curved in the east-west direction. Why? Well, he'll go on to say, if the Earth is curved in both north-south and east-west, the most likely shape is a sphere. But then he's going to build on that. But first of all, the problem is, again, this is very slow communication, but regardless of if something happened before or after a sunset, it, again, doesn't prove anything about the shape of the Earth. It proves something about what the sun and moon do in the sky and when they do it. Nobody says that you see either a solar or a lunar eclipse, everyone in the world at the same time. Nobody says that. Even the one coming up in a few days here where I live, the solar eclipse, it has you can look at maps where it has a track going across the United States at an angle. It takes time. It's not going to happen the same time of day where I live, where it will happen up in the northeast part of the country or where it had happened in the southwest. It takes time. The sun, moon, and stars move at about 15 degrees an hour. You can prove this with a sundial. But the point is that they don't happen at the same time anyway, so what would this difference in when things happen in either Greece or Spain have anything to do with proving that the Earth is a ball? And whether it's circular in an east-west shape. And then he goes on to say, building on this knowledge that the Earth was spherical, making that assumption, some people did, he says, around 200 BC, Eratosthenes accurately measured Earth's size. Now, how did he do that? And he talks a little bit about, where he was, Alexandria, and that there were, you can look up what you may want to find about that. But let me see if I can find the next slide on here that will show Eratosthenes, and that's it. Let me see if I can get that again. This picture was taken on a flat table, put up some batteries, and had one spotlight at an angle. And look at the different shadow sizes, even though the batteries are all the same height. So, according to Eratosthenes, this table is a ball. According to Faulkner, this table is a ball. And not only a ball, you can figure out the circumference. I hope everyone can see why this is a problem for both Eratosthenes in the past, allegedly, and astronomers today. How can you say that the shadows and the sticks prove anything? And notice also, if you read Faulkner's book, that he's assuming parallel light rays from the sun. Now, I'm not going to show the illustrations in his books. I don't want to get copyright strikes, but he assumes parallel rays from the sun. Now, why would anybody do that? We know intuitively that if you have a ball, say, for example, a good illustration would be for sewing, you may have a pincushion, right? Assume this pincushion is a perfect spherical shape, or pear shape if you want to listen to other astronomers such as Neil deGrasse Tyson. How you get parallel rays from that, I'll never know either. But even from a perfect sphere, if you were to put pins all over that cushion to very high precision, no two of them would be parallel. And the problem gets worse the farther you get from the ball. If you had 8-foot-long pins, very tiny diameter, and stuck them on every possible surface on the ball, no two of them would be parallel. And the farther you get out to the 8-foot range or whatever, the maximum range, they're going to be farther apart. They get farther apart as they go because they're starting from a center point and radiating out. That's what a radius is. You cannot have parallel radii in a sphere. But this must be presumed if you want the surface of a ball to be proved by shadow length from parallel rays. The sun doesn't do that. You can say, well, it's so far away. Well, that's worse. It does more damage to your argument because the farther it is, the farther apart each individual ray is. So they're angling apart. By far apart, they start at the same vertex, allegedly, but they go out away from each other and get farther away from each point from the other, each line, each ray of light, if you want to think of it as that, as they go. So the sun being far away does not help their argument at all. And they say that he, as I mentioned, he says that he figured out Earth's size. Eratosthenes is the father of geography because he coined the term geography and commissioned the creation of many maps. This makes him right. I could initiate some imaginary world. I could draw my own map of Narnia or the realms of the Lord of the Rings, anything like that. I could make up my own fantasy world and draw many maps and none of them would be real. So he goes on for a while talking about Eratosthenes and parallel rays from the sun. And he says on page 25 that flat earthers further claim that they can explain Eratosthenes' result on a flat earth. Both statements are true, that he didn't prove it's a sphere and that they can explain it, but flat earthers have missed the point, he says. Notice above that I didn't state that Eratosthenes proved the Earth was a sphere. Rather, I said, building on this knowledge that Earth was already spherical, Eratosthenes measured its size. So he's being pedantic here and whistling past the point that he's already assumed, as he claims Eratosthenes did, that the Earth was already proved a sphere, and all he was trying to figure out is how big. Well, again, the sticks and shadows don't tell you how big Earth is. They don't tell you its shape. So why would Eratosthenes' little demonstration prove anything? And then he'll talk about parallax and some other things, and we'll get more into that later in the book. But this is a laughable claim because, again, he's presuming parallel rays from the sun and ignoring that the same shadows happen on a flat surface. But in saying that both statements were true, he admits that flat Earth can explain the quote-unquote experiment, and then he backtracks his own point about the circumference, which can only apply to a sphere, while claiming he never said Eratosthenes proved it's a sphere. What is all this for if he didn't prove it was a sphere? Isn't that what we're trying to figure out? We don't care how big Narnia is. We don't care how long you can walk in any of the realms in Lord of the Rings, such as, Middle Earth was the focus on that one. There are other Tolkien books, but it's Fantasyland. Why do we care? And it doesn't prove any point anyway. Now, he says there are many flat Earth heights, many different heights of the sun claimed in flat Earth model. First of all, what flat Earth model? We don't claim a model. And so people don't know the height. Nobody can really claim to know the height because no one has measured it. And there's a big difference between measuring and calculation, which seems to escape most astronomers' notice these days. Calculation is not measurement, necessarily. Sometimes it is something you can draw from measurements, but you can't call calculation itself a measurement. It's a calculation. That's why they're different words. But so what? He says this different disagreement is because different approaches produce different results. We can do the same thing with the heliocentric model. Since they depend on a whole bunch of presumptions to figure out the distance of stars, and if you really want to look at the history of heliocentrism, you'll find the sun's distance has been increasing and increasing and increasing to make everything work out right for them. Pots and kettles. I don't know what point he thinks that he's making here. And again, he says, if whatever this flat Earth model were true, this ought not to be the case. So when your young Earth creationists disagree on things, it proves young Earth creationism isn't true. Is that the point he's trying to make here? There are disagreements among young Earth creationists. And as I've said, how many times did astronomers change the distance to the sun? So what point is he making that doesn't also destroy young Earth creationism if disagreement is a game changer or debunks something? And then we we skip a few pages because he talks about epicycles and all these things that are irrelevant. We go to page 29 where he says, that by eliminating the large epicycles to explain retrograde motion, the heliocentric model offered the desired simplicity. I wouldn't call that simplicity. It may be simpler than epicycles models, but that is hardly a fair test of Occam's razor, which is, given several different possibilities, the simplest answer is usually correct. Occam's razor is not a scientific proof. It's a rule of thumb. But he says, again, when he was saying that these things can't be true if the Earth is flat, but then he says this about this current thing, by eliminating large epicycles, it gives it this simplicity. Occam's razor, I said, is a scientific procedure now? No? Does creation require us to desire simplicity? No. Occam's razor is not a theological method. It's not a scientific method. It's just a rule of thumb. If you can't decide, pick the simplest one. This is not science, and it's not theology, and it's not logic. Okay, so let's go down to page 30, where he says, Jeffrey Burton Russell's 1991 book, Inventing Flat Earth, Columbus, and Modern Historians, is a detailed refutation of the flat Earth myth. So you're going to start your book, we're in chapter 1, by declaring it a myth, and this is your debunk, and this is how you're going to train people to refute flat earthers when they come up with questions you can't answer? Oh, it's a myth. Hand wave dismissal. He doesn't prove really anything, and I haven't read the book, I don't know, but I can't rely on his interpretation of anything that he cites. But the problem is that this is not a refutation anyway. Somebody's opinion. Unless he's going to reiterate all the proofs, which you'll don't want to hold your breath looking for that in this book. It's not a refutation of anything. So he's begging the question and simply declares this to be a successful refutation and leaves it there. He says in chapter 24 of book 3 of Divine Institutes, Lactantius mocked those who believed the earth was spherical. The other was Cosmas, whatever, a Greek from Alexandria who in the 6th century made several voyages to India and Ceylon, and he later wrote Christian topography. He argued that the earth was flat and rectangular. The heaven was shaped like a box with a curved lid. So, that's one guy. He took his contemporary Christians to task for believing earth was spherical, claiming the spherical earth was pagan inspired. Nobody can disagree with that. Haven't you been doing this, Mr. Faulkner, going through history and saying everybody thought it was spherical, and you weren't always quoting Christian sources, you were quoting Greek philosophers? And then he says, that is evidence that Christians at the time generally believed Earth to be a globe. For why would one criticize a belief that did not exist? That doesn't make it general. And how many people were writing at this point in history? And he says, neither of these people are known for anything else. If not for their odd ideas about the Earth's shape, they would be more obscure than they already are. So, let's look at the note here. Calling ideas odd because they're not popular is not a refutation. And you admit here in the book that this is one extreme exception. People can write about all sorts of things that aren't true, and they can be wrong when they write. Pun intended. So again, what are we proving? Why are we wasting our time on this? Okay, so we're going to go down to the last note I have on page 30 here. Modern flat earthers have unquestionably accepted this fall history created by critics. That is a bald-faced lie, and he knows it. And the reason we called it a lie is because, again, he claims to be a subject matter expert on flat earth cosmology, and that he spent all this time researching and listening, and he's written many articles on his blog at Answers in Genesis, so he can't claim ignorance. So to make this claim about modern flat earthers that he doesn't name, this is just poisoning the well, slander, whatever you want to call it, but it's above all burning a straw man. Then he talks about these critics who are unnamed, claiming Augustine taught the earth was flat. I don't care. And again, I don't trust him to understand his quotations. He does have part of this one from Augustine here in his book, and I think I can at least read part of that. He says, the entire chapter reads, this is chapter 9 of book 16 of City of God. Quote, but as to the fable that there are antipodes, that is to say, men on the opposite side of the earth, where the sun rises when it sets to us, men who walk with their feet opposite ours, that is on no ground credible. And indeed, it is not affirmed that this has been learned by historical knowledge, but by scientific conjecture, on the ground that the earth is suspended within the concavity of the sky, and it has much room on the one side as the other. Hence they say the part which is beneath must also be inhabited. I'm going to say his name wrong. Augustine is refuting this idea of antipodes. That is to say, people living on a sphere and being stuck to the surface. And so some people are opposite other people, where up is down and down is up. Anyway, but they do not remark that although it be supposed or scientifically demonstrated that the world is of a round and spherical form, yet it does not follow that the other side of the earth is bare of water, nor even though it be bare, does it immediately follow that it is peopled. He's just saying this is a hypothetical. Even if it were a ball, it doesn't mean it has to be inhabited. What point is Faulkner making with this quote? But let me go on. For scripture which proves the earth of its historical statements by accomplishment of its prophecies gives no false information. And it is too absurd to say that some men might have taken ship and traversed the whole ocean and crossed from this side of the world to the other, and that even the inhabitants of that distant region are descended from that one first man. This is all hypothetical. Let me go on. Wherefore, let us seek if we can find the city of God that sojourns on earth among those human races who are cataloged as having been divided into 72 nations, etc., etc., and talking about, the people who came off the ark. Nowhere in this quote does Augustine say the earth is a sphere or argue for it. He's just saying it's a ridiculous idea, but even if it were true, it doesn't mean people live there. That's all Augustine is saying. But what is Faulkner saying? First, let me look at my note I had here about, indeed, it is not affirmed that this has been learned by historical knowledge. I didn't really put anything on that one because, again, these notes are broken up, but by scientific conjecture. Here I said, Faulkner misunderstands what he quoted from Augustine. Does he know what conjecture means? At best, he could take it as inference, but it's still guesswork, however educated. Augustine contrasts scientific conjecture with historical knowledge. Nowhere in the quote does Augustine declare the earth to be a globe or deny that it's flat. Faulkner is putting words in Augustine's mouth. So, because Faulkner says, here Augustine concludes that there are no antipodes. Many people incorrectly assume that the antipodes refer to locations on the other side of the spherical earth, and so erroneously conclude that Augustine's rejection of the antipodes amounts to rejection of earth being spherical. That's exactly what he did. He rejected both. He says, however, Augustine defined the antipodes as men on the opposite side of the earth. The word antipode means opposite feet. Furthermore, if Augustine had intended the antipodes to mean opposite sides of the earth, a singular form of antipode. So now he's going to play grammatics and say that they're, whether it was singular or plural, that has no bearing on any proof or disproof or whether he understood Augustine's quote. He says that he pointed out that it does not follow that the other side of the globe has any land. If it were a globe, that's the part he's missing. And as a PhD, I'd have to hope that he reads more carefully than that. And then, if so, the only conclusion we're left with is that he's lying. What else can it be? He can't claim ignorance. He can't claim sloppiness as a PhD. What else can it be but dishonesty? When we just read Augustine's quote and he says, this is conjecture, but let's continue this conjecture and say, just because you believe, somebody may believe it's a ball doesn't mean people have to live there. That's all that Augustine is saying. So, and I made note that globe does not appear in the quoted text that he's referencing. Then on page 32, he says, this work, let me go back and get you the name of that work. He says Cicero wrote The Dream of Scipio based on a Roman general as part of a larger work. Most did not survive. It's interesting how they put together, small things from large things from small things, which incidentally is something that pointed out by Answers in Genesis in the Creation Museum, that the so-called Lucy skeleton only had a half a dozen bones. and it was of an extinct ape. It was not a pre-human anything, and the vast majority of the bones are made up. Now here he is doing that with this work here, but he says, however, we have all of the dreams of Scipio thanks to a commentary on it written by somebody else. So somebody wrote down, copied, somebody made Macrobius in the 5th century. 5th century. From something in the 2nd century. 300 years later, this guy wrote, it really was only, I assume, writing from Macrobius. What could go wrong in several hundred years of somebody copying by hand, and that's the source that we're going to use? He says this work was one of the most popular books during the Middle Ages. What does that prove? The Dream of Scipio describes a spherical Earth. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe this guy copied it wrong or right, who knows? But the point, again, is this is a very shaky ground upon which to build anything. But, again, I say on my notes here, so Faulkner seems more intent upon whether anyone thought of sphere Earth before recent times, rather than actually arguing Earth shape. And that is a theme throughout the book. Let's go on here to page 35, because we're on 33. We're going to skip a page. It's mostly an illustration of a snippet of a book, of a copy. And so we're going to go to page 35, where he says, flat earthers persist in confusing the two issues of movement and shape. We don't confuse those things. Faulkner knows we don't confuse those things. Movement and shape are two very different things. So burning a straw man, misrepresentation, deliberate, because as we've established already, he has no excuses for ignorance or stupidity or sloppiness. Therefore, anything that is not true is a falsehood. Now, nobody's perfect, but when it's the theme of the book, and as we will see, goes throughout the whole book, this is more than mere typos or human frailty. So flat earthers are not confusing these two things. None of them are named who allegedly believe this. Later on this page, he says, one must wonder how accurately this attribution reflected Luther's thoughts on the matter, as far as quoting Martin Luther on anything. Why can't we ask that same question? Because first Faulkner claims flat earthers confuse what Luther said, and then he claims Luther never said it. But what did we just see in that example with Augustine and this other book? How unreliable the sources were, and whether he accurately portrayed what was being argued in the quotation from Augustine, especially. But anyway, in this case, if you read the book, again, I can't just cite the whole thing. First, he claims flat earthers confuse what Luther said, and then says Luther didn't say it. Now there's an embarrassing typo here on page 35, since we were just mentioning typos. He says, this discussion of the history of Western cosmology is far from exhaustive. There are many more examples that one could cite. That should be CITE. He wrote SITE. Nobody caught it. A site is a location. It's something you can see, but a citation starts with a C. I'm beginning to, I could put two and two together if I wanted to be sloppy and Faulkner-esque and say that, well, see, he how can he be a real PhD? He misspelled a word. He has a typo. But anyway, I'm not going to stoop to that. But that's an embarrassing typo. I have to point this out because any little thing that flat earthers allegedly say is blown way out of proportion anyhow. So fair is fair. Then he says, in the last paragraph on page 34, after the site typo, the dominant cosmology in the West for 25 centuries had been that the Earth is spherical. However, that dominant cosmology was geocentric until 4 centuries ago. Appeal to popularity or consensus. it doesn't prove anything. And then he says, until 4 centuries ago, when heliocentric theory replaced geocentric, there are geocentrists today who believe Earth is a ball. Anyway, he says the fall history, or faux, however you want to pronounce that, of cosmology that the flat earthers peddle. Who is peddling this? That nearly everyone believed Earth was flat until 500 years ago could not be more wrong. Pot, meat, kettle. I mean, who has he been quoting? Inaccurately at times, and even when he quotes accurately, he doesn't understand accurately, or doesn't convey an accurate portrayal of what we ourselves could read in the quote that he put in the book. I don't care about appeals to popularity on either side. Pots and kettles. And then he also says, furthermore, their repeated confusion of the geocentric model with the flat earth model further clouds this false history. Again, who is doing the confusing? And he keeps saying everyone. As far as we can tell, everyone that he's talking about is a relatively few church fathers at best. So, let's do at least one more page of notes here. And we're on page 36. I had a note on page 35 that he kept repeating false claims about flat earthers. But 36, he says, it is a result of concentrated effort to discredit Christianity and the Bible. This is his fear. What's this he's peddling? A conspiracy theory? I mean, he gave a mocking illustration in the book about something related to that I'm not going to take the time to go into, but he's basically bashing the idea of conspiracy theories, which anyone who's studied the matter would know is a term developed by spy agencies in the United States to discredit and silence whistleblowers, calling it a conspiracy theory. Well, there have been many conspiracies in history. They're not theories. And because someone says, blows the whistle on something doesn't make it a conspiracy theory. There are real conspiracies, and that's how they are conflating the words and mislabeling people. But anyway, if he doesn't like so-called popularly understood by design conspiracy theories, he's peddling one of his own. How many people would have to be in on this conspiracy? And how does taking the Bible literally discredit anybody? So anyway, he's trying to answer the question of how flat Earth caught on in modern times, and he says it's a conspiracy theory. There's a conspiracy to discredit Christianity and the Bible. Isn't that what people say about younger creationism? And later he says, this thinking came to fruition in the 19th century when the flat Earth myth was concocted. Are we being fair and balanced or even scholarly at this point? It's a myth, begging the question, and concocted, a pejorative term. So Faulkner at this point has dropped any pretense of objectivity and sunk to a troll writing a mere hit piece. And this is the character of the entire book. And many of his articles on his blog, you will find trollish behavior, unbecoming of a PhD, unbecoming of a Christian. And frankly, I think the organizations he's associated with should be embarrassed by this behavior. This is not PhD level writing, even when you're dumbing down to a general audience. This is not how you write. This is a polemic. He is afraid. As he stated himself, this is not me guessing what his motives are. He has stated them. So then he says, here also on page 36, about a major figure creating the flat earth myth being Washington Irving in 1828, talking about Christopher Columbus. And he says, he complains that Irving blended true and false information, like, I don't know, this book. I could easily make that claim, and I think I've established that so far, a mixture of true and false. Anyway, continuing to label flat Earth a myth begs the question over and over. As I said, he's just going to keep on this. This is not accidental. It's not a fluke. It's not a moment of weakness. It's a whole book full of it. Anyway, he says that this led to the conflict thesis, the idea that religion in general and Christianity in particular had held back progress. What will the future say about the concoction of young Earth creationism? Even today, there are old Earth creationists saying that very thing. In this, Faulkner reveals the explanation for his obsession with flat Earth, that Christianity and its scientists will be seen as anti-science, oh the horror, if he doesn't put a stop to flat Earth acceptance. In other words, Faulkner is afraid. As he stated directly and exhibits throughout the book, he is afraid to be called anti-science, but that's already a problem for a young Earth creationist in the eyes of the world. Who is it that's going to call him anti-science? Yes, there are old Earth creationists such as Hugh Ross and Reasons to Believe who would call young Earth creationists anti-science. So why is it that flat Earth, which half of which popularity is due to its critics screaming about it, why is this worse? How is it different? It just isn't. All right, one more page of notes, and we're getting close to our hour. So anyway, he says, let me see, let me get the page number on page 38, at page 38, under the Flat Earth Movement is Born. Sorry, actually it's 39. Sometimes the quotes don't give me the right page, but the page numbers, as I said, are not set in stone. He says it's more probable that Rowbotham was influenced by fellow Englishman Waywell, I guess is the name. This is speculation. If we're going to discuss motivations and influences, we should see how Faulkner likes the taste of his own medicine. And then later on this page, and this is again still page 38, according to my document that I'm not showing on the screen. He says, Rowbotham concluded the Earth must be flat based on his experiment. This was the Bedford level, I think, was the experiment, if I got that right. Yeah, and you can read up about that. But he says it's more likely that Rowbotham had already concluded Earth was flat, so this experiment merely confirmed his thesis, at least to his satisfaction. Faulkner ignores the observed facts of the experiment, because he's using that term, to baselessly claim Rowbotham was simply exhibiting confirmation bias. Does Faulkner think he's immune from that? We can all reach our own conclusions, but I think the book has exhibited the fact that Faulkner does seem to think he's immune from confirmation bias. When he's already stated his motive is his fear, he also has a career to protect. If we're going to assign motives, and guess what they are, or as the popular saying is in the world, follow the money, we could assign motives very easily to him that are not either Christian or professional or scientific, but we're not going to stoop that low. But the point is that if he's going to accuse Rowbotham of, who can't answer for himself, because he died long ago, of confirmation bias, then we can throw that right back at Faulkner. Okay, so, and then we'll go on to the next page, whatever page you want to call it by now. He says, Rowbotham's zetetic flat Earth model is very different from ancient flat Earth cosmologies. Why is this a problem? Why point this out? What does it prove? Nothing at all. He says, then modern flat earthers must go through elaborate mental gymnastics to explain how it's possible for the sun, moon, and many stars to only appear to rise and set. This is another mocking presumption and a display of ignorance about what flat earthers say. I'm being kind in saying ignorance, because we all know he can't claim ignorance. He knows very well flat earthers don't say this. So what's it a display of? It must be dishonesty and an attempt to, since he's not, as he said in other videos, not writing this book to flat earthers to convince them, but to get stragglers basically in Christianity who are undecided and try to reel them in before flat earthers do. So we're to put it kindly, surface skimming. We're going after the surface skimmers here in this book. So he's using mockery, and he's presuming a lot of things and claiming that we say things we don't say. There are many ideas about rising and setting, and our view from the surface, looking through many layers of air at different thicknesses and watching things that are beyond that. So we can't claim anything about knowing exactly where things are or how far away they are or how big they are. We only say what an almanac would say, which is based on observation, where you say at this day, at this time, or this night at this time, this particular star will be 90 degrees overhead of this location on the surface of the Earth. That's how you do navigation at sea. But anyway, let's go on to another quote here, where he says, "This is one of the evidences that they use to argue that the Earth is a sphere." And that is from when he says, as I discussed earlier, the ancient Greeks became aware that time was not the same across the Earth, but time became progressively earlier as one travels westward. How does that prove it's a sphere? It doesn't. There's no way I can imagine where that proves that's a sphere. Has he even considered that, as the Bible says, the sun and moon and stars move over the overhead? If they're moving, there you have it. They're moving. And this is the same problem as with ships on the horizon. Simply assuming that only a sphere can account for what you see without regard for conditions or optics is just juvenile at best. And then he says the conventional cosmology of a spinning globe Earth can explain all of these and then some. This sounds like confirmation bias to me that was thrown at Rowbotham. He is confident, and I'm saying he as in Faulkner, is confident that everything that we'll see will prove the Earth is a sphere. Isn't that what also evolutionists say? Evolutionary theory, which is the only thing that really evolves, you can't pin it down. If you asked 5 evolutionists to define it, you'd get 6 or 7 definitions. They do the same thing, and they'll say that it's basically unfalsifiable, not only because it changes all the time, but because no matter what would ever be discovered, and I've seen quotations of this, they're going to believe in evolution regardless. They're going to wait until science finds an explanation in the future. This is a faith in the future, a belief in prophecy, even if it's not, it's just a claim of the future, not even claiming that they know what's going to happen, but they assume it by faith that modern science will prove them right and prove evolution true at every step. That's exactly the theory that modern cosmology is based upon, and the vast majority of modern cosmologists are atheists and evolutionists, and even among Christians, the old Earth creationists believe in, I think they believe in Big Bang. That kind of hard not to if you're an old Earther. But he has confirmation bias, no doubt about it. So pots and kettles. All right. So we're going to stop here for this video. I'm hoping that we're seeing a trend here about the character of the book, the claims of expertise of the writer, the sometimes careless mistakes he makes, and other times what, by his own admission, we're only left with dishonesty on things that are, even when he quotes something, if the quote is accurate, even what we read doesn't say what he thinks it said about Augustine, but the superficial audience that he's going for will probably just gloss past that and be convinced of whatever he's saying. So that's enough for part 2, and we'll pick it up next time. Thanks for watching.